I don't know how far some of you come from. How many are from, if you're in your backyard, or some of you, obviously in Sean's case, come from Virginia or something like that. But it takes a lot of work. As I go through this, I'm going to talk somewhat about my history, which I don't like to do for personal reasons. You all don't want to hear about me, but I want to use it as a case study for the value of policy debate in the afterlife, after you leave the policy debate world. Nothing that I talk about in here is going to be independent of its impact after I left the policy world. Before I do that, I want to get to know a little bit from you all right? I'm going to ask two questions, and I want a couple people to give me feedback. One is the biggest sacrifice you made for debate, and the second is the biggest thrill you got out of debate, or why you do the activity. Let me start with sacrifices. What's the biggest sacrifice you made for debate?
Well, my first debate tournament, the Cubs just won the World Series, so instead of going to the big parade in Chicago, I went to the debate tournament instead.
Instead of going to the parade?
Yeah, they had a huge parade all throughout Chicago for the Cubs.
I was going to say, that's like the largest parade in history for a non-religious figure, right?
Yeah.
All right. That's big. You can top it? It's just really competitive. Quit football. Yep. Yep. Very similar. I should have left wrestling, but I left professional wrestling. I left wrestling for debate as well. Let's do two more. Yeah.
Just imagine how you take me out all the time for my birthday, and instead of going to my birthday, with my family, I just went to the tournament.
Yeah. Yeah. Family can be big, and I saw one more over here. Yeah.
I got fired from 3 jobs.
Really? Because of tournaments, or? Yeah. No, that takes a lot. We were talking about this dinner actually. One of the sacrifices, this doesn't compare to getting fired from a job, but one of the things I often think is that I wasn't able to do a junior abroad when I was in college, or live abroad or something like that. I was in the middle of debating, which I would not trade that, because that was the year that we won the NDI. But I also couldn't take a language when I was in college, because if you missed more than 3 classes, and most college classes you can get away, we were talking about this, I had as a humanities student, I had about a 10 to 12 hours per week of classes, and that was it. Everything else is done on your own time. But as a non-hard science student, as a government student, I was able to do that. But if I were to take a language, it would be 5 days a week. You couldn't take a first-year language without missing more than 3 days. If I had done that, I would have failed the class by mid-October in the Kentucky Round Robin. We would have been out. So that's nothing to sneeze at, those sorts of sacrifices. You've got to love this game if you're going to do it. You've got to really want to do it. I doubt, sincerely, that any of you who are doing this are doing it just for college credit at this point. Right? Having debate behind your resume is one thing, but having the sacrifices that you make to go away from the summer, if you're missing family trips, if you're skipping a birthday, not being able to work in jobs, not getting the same money that you would otherwise, it takes a lot of sacrifice for this. So flip that around. What's the reason? What's the thrill? What's the moment that really led you to think, this is something that I want to invest my time in to come here this summer? It can be social, it can be competitive, it can be whatever it is. What's that moment when you thought, this is something that I want to spend a lot of time and invest my time and energy to do? Yeah. Winning. What's the win that you remember the most?
Not a lot.
Not a lot. I remember more losses than wins in the debates that I had. I remember especially losses at a tournament when you kind of got farther than you ever had before. I don't remember the last round I won, but I remember the last round I lost. When I was a junior, I got to the quarters at Emory, and I remember that debate. We had never cleared it in the national tournament before, but I remember that loss as thinking, this was a close debate, we had arrived, and that was a high school debate, having still debated 5 years after that. I remember those a little bit more. Christy Mathewson, the third most winningest pitcher in baseball history, always said he learned more from his losses than he did from his wins. So when your coaches tell you something like, we win or we learn, that's not all BS. There actually is a lot to be said for that. Other examples. What's the thrill? Yeah.
Like after you give a speech that you spend a lot of time preparing, like working towards the feeling that when you know you get a good speech.
Yeah. Any specific example you remember?
I had trouble getting chaos last year, so I spent a lot of time prepping against this Vogue team.
Mm-hmm. You remember the constructive or the rebuttal awards you gave?
The rebuttal.
Yeah. The one that matters. Yep. Yeah.
I remember the very first one I ever delivered.
Yeah. Did you cover it?
I did, and that was when I knew that
That
I
was.
really loved it.
That's at least that I can do this. One last one. Yeah. Let's do the two. But yeah. Yes, you and back.
The first time I ever went around, because I was losing a lot at the beginning of the season, and then I went rushing back.
Yep. How many had you lost before that one?
6.
6 isn't bad. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe putting myself into an uncomfortable situation.
That's the thrill.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's good. You're doing that intentionally, or you like being uncomfortable? Yeah. To challenge yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. Is that something you figured out for yourself, or something you were told that it would be good
Something
for
I figured
yourself?
out for myself.
Yeah, that's awesome. A lot of this game attracts self-starters. We'll talk about some of the values of this. A lot of this game attracts people that like to do things for themselves. They're researchers, they're independent thinkers, they're people that want to get out there and want to perform on a stage. I'll tell you straight up, one of the weird things in my experience was I hated public speaking. I remember debating as a freshman in 9th grade, not liking public speaking whatsoever, and I literally didn't figure out until I was a senior in college when I saw a picture of the audience that had watched the NDT finals. And that was the first time I processed who was in the audience. I had taught myself over a period of time to only pay attention to the team I was debating in the room and the judging panel. And everything that was out there, I screened out because it was a self-defense mechanism from speaking in public. There were 200 people in that room watching that debate, and I had no idea until I saw a picture in a book of it afterwards. But you need to sort of get over your fears, put yourself in uncomfortable situations, because that thrill of winning those debates, because that competition, because that 2-on-2 struggle to win the debates intellectually is something you cannot get from mathletes. You're not going to get it from the chess club. You're not going to get it from Quiz Bowl. You're not going to get it from Robo Wars or any of the other intellectual competitions. The one thing that drives me nuts about this activity is that it's subjective. I always tell my wife that I can't stand watching figure skating competitions because I have no idea who actually ends up winning at the end of the day because it's a subjective thing. It's not a score, it's not goals, it's not a clock. That's the one thing that bugs me. But in order to do that, there's no way to avoid that in intellectual competition. And there is no game like this that puts you in that competition. One of the ways I remember this the most was coming back to the activity. We had done a couple of these introductory tournaments. The Saturday tournaments that you do as a first year or second year, it's maybe 4 rounds in the day. There's no elims at the end of it. They just announced who had the best record, what their speaker points were, and that was fine for the first couple tournaments we came back to. But that first tournament you go to, what I was reminded of was the bracket. How much that elim bracket mattered for that kind of thrill. Who's on your side of the bracket? What's that team that you don't want to deal with, the Baudrillard team, or whether it's a policy team or whatever the case may be? Who's that team that you want to see on the other side of the bracket? Who's the curveball that's in your side of the bracket that you didn't want to have to deal with? Are you in the bracket at all? Right, that's how we progress in this activity. Do we clear, and then once we clear, how do we win the thing? How do we advance farther than we ever have before? This bracket is only up there to show you a couple things. What I want to transition to is, for all the reasons that I mentioned, all that competitive fire, all that reason for the bracket, is I want to show you just what some of the people that have been in this tournament have subsequently done after their time in debate. The time that I wanted to give this speech, and I apologize if the bottom is cut off, I will mention before I start talking, what's particularly significant about the bottom being cut off is that it's actually the doubles round between Georgetown's top team and Northwestern's top team that year. For those of you that debate in the West, Northwestern's top team was Tim Alderetti, and Georgetown's top team was Kevin Kuzma that year. So for those of you that debate out West, this is the tournament that they were in at that stage when they were younger in 1990 at that point. That's not relevant to where they've gone subsequently because you know those people. What I want to do is introduce you to some people that were in this tournament as well as elsewhere and what they've done afterwards. The moment that I had sort of talked with Dave and others about giving this presentation, the moment that I locked it in and said, I've got to come do this, was I believe February 2nd of this year. Because on February 2nd of this year, that was the day that Trump nominated Neil Gorsuch for the Supreme Court. And on NPR that night, there were 2 stories. The first one was a discussion of the Supreme Court nomination, and a guest that they had of a liberal lawyer who was on saying, defending Gorsuch as a Republican nomination for the Supreme Court justice. He was someone who had crossed political lines in order to go ahead and defend Gorsuch from a legal standpoint as a qualified Supreme Court justice, even though he was nominated after the Republicans had stonewalled the Democratic nomination at the end of Obama's term, and even though he was not a Democrat. That liberal lawyer was a guy named Neil Katyal. Neil Katyal is Dartmouth A, who was the team that we debated in the semifinals of that tournament and was the 8th seed in that tournament. Neil also has defended Osama bin Laden's driver in a Supreme Court case for his rights in a U.S. legal case, and is viewed as one of the most talented lawyers and is right now involved in a lot of court cases pressing against the travel ban, the Muslim ban, in courts going forward. For the most part of this presentation, I don't want to talk about stuff like that, only because so many people in debate know where the lawyers went. Before I came into this activity, everybody who had been in debate went into law for one reason or another. And we'll talk a little bit about why that is and how that changed in my own experience. But Neil was one of the ones who was in that story. The second one, in a different story of the 4 that were on NPR that night, was a story about a raid in Yemen that had gone haywire, and a couple of the Americans involved in the raid had lost their lives involved in it. And there was a discussion about the extent to which the Obama administration had approved that raid prior to the transition in the inauguration that had happened just 2 weeks earlier. One of the guests who was in that was the Deputy National Security Advisor for President Obama, who was a guy named Colin Kahl. Colin Kahl was Michigan A. He was the 7th seed in that tournament as a freshman. When he debated, he ended up going on and, I believe, losing the finals of the NDT. If Dave's the historian here is going to have to remind me if that's right or not. Yep. A couple of years later. And I'm going to talk about Colin in a little bit more detail. The fact that you had 2 policy debaters that were in this same tournament on one night in a major analytical news about 2 completely different stories, one on law, one on foreign policy, was something that made me think, I don't even know how many debaters remember who these people are, and that they debated, much less that they debated at the same time, now a generation later. So let's talk about some of who those people are. One of the other people, before I start getting more into the sort of foreign policy, my own field, which I'll talk in a minute about who those are, how many of you debated on the surveillance topic? Keep your hand up if you remember the name Edward Snowden. Keep your hand up if you remember the name Glenn Greenwald. Glenn Greenwald was the journalist for The Guardian that Snowden turned the files over to. Glenn Greenwald was George Washington A. He was the 14th seed in that tournament. He beat Harvard's second team. He was in this same tournament. Greenwald is somebody who has gone on to a career, again, in law, although it's been with a twist because he's been blogging and now obviously has to deal with a lot of other issues in his life since this has come about. What I wanted to draw here was an article that he had given at George Washington when he talked about the role the debate played in his life. It's really hard when you don't have a lot of people talk about their foundation. You don't have a lot of people, for reasons that we'll talk about in a minute, giving biographical interviews about the forces that shaped their lives the most. This is one that he did when he talked about how he developed as a debater and some of the foundations. The article goes on to talk in a couple of different places about how it gave him an outlet to philosophically challenge people, to really be able to be an independent thinker and develop those abilities in ways that he hadn't otherwise. And he continued professionally in ways by blogging about legal issues and by challenging the institutional system, including going through a series of processes to figure out how they were going to, and under what circumstances, they would release some of the information that were in the files that Snowden had to try and minimize some of the jeopardy to national security, even while revealing some of the surveillance programs that were going on domestically before we knew who Edward Snowden was. Greenwald was the one that Snowden turned to, which then subsequently turned into a movie. How many of you have seen the movie? So Zach Quinto's character is Glenn. That's the person that he's talking about and sort of the role that he had in this going forward. The training that he had through debate to figure out both sides of the argument. What threatens national security? What do people need to know for civil liberties? How do you reveal some of these? Under what circumstances? How do you protect the security and the sources and methods of the people who were involved without turning over those issues is part of the process that going through in policy debate would help going forward. For the rest of this presentation, what I want to do is break this down. That title that you saw at the beginning, sort of While I Slept by Rip Van Winkle, I had debated in high school at Edgemont High School from 1983 to 1987, and then in college from 1987 to 1994. I continued to coach high school where my brother was at Edgemont until 1994, after which I left with the exception of the internship, which we'll talk about in a minute, and I came back for the weapons of mass destruction topic, which I think was 1998 at the high school level, but it might have been 2001. I can't remember exactly what it was. It was Branson's topic. Whatever it was, because that guy floored me with his ability to know the cards and stuff like that. That gap between 1994 and 2014 when I came back is a 20-year span. So it seemed like sort of a rhetorical device to use that as my Rip Van Winkle time when I slept from the activity and only had a vague connection to the activity of what some of the changes were that were going on during that 2-decade period from 1994 to 2014. So I want to break this down into 3 pieces. The first part is only going to be to talk about my own experience as a case study to demonstrate the role that policy debate had in opening up professional opportunities for me. The things that happened to me after I left the activity the first time, before I came back. The second block, while I slept, is going to be introducing you to a series of people in the field of foreign policy analysis. Professional debaters that go into foreign policy to do what we do as a game in this space at a professional level in different areas of Washington, be they academia, in government itself, in and out of government, or in some of the consulting firms and think tanks on the margin that help guide the informed public debate, the type of debates that you'll see on CNN or the Sunday morning news programs or in the editorial pages and some of the journals like the Washington Quarterly and other. The last section of this will be returning to the game, the things that I've seen in the debate game that are much different from where I was. Not to pass judgment on them, but to demonstrate where some of those changes are and some of the reasons I think the game has changed over that 20-year period. You've all probably heard the story about the frog boiled in water that kind of doesn't realize where they are, and then all of a sudden they're boiled alive because they've been getting used to the temperature adjustments. Not that we're all getting boiled alive in this activity, but having left for 20 years and then coming back, there are some things that I've seen in how the activity has changed that people who have stayed in the activity kind of got an ability to get incrementally adjusted to it year by year that for me were extremely different and for reasons that I think are explained in the world outside of debate that debate reflects inside. So the first part of this is creating a career from policy debate and before I slept. From the time that we won the NDT in 1990 to the time that I left and beyond, there were a couple of things that happened and a couple of influences that debate had on me that led me to a career change. I applied when I was leaving college to go to law school and was deciding my senior year whether to do it or not. Ended up taking a right turn and deciding not to go to law school. Well, the first thing that happened prior to even going into that was that my admission to Harvard was undoubtedly because of debate. I was third in my class at Edgemont. The top 2 did not get into Harvard. They got to Yale and Stanford, so it wasn't all that bad, but they didn't get into Harvard. And in the subsequent things that I found out it was for 2 reasons. One was the extracurricular success. If anybody in here doesn't know that what colleges are looking for is leadership and excellence in extracurriculars, now you know. And that's from someone who does interviews now for people going into Harvard as an alumni for the alumni interviews going afterwards. But on top of that, what I also was told subsequently is that I nailed the interview. And that was partially because of the training I had in debate. For somebody that was scared to talk in public, being able to relate to somebody in that ability was something that I picked up from my training from debate that helped me at a very foundational level in where I went to college to begin to establish who I was as a person coming out of high school. My interest in foreign policy. When I was in high school, we had 4 domestic policy topics. When I was in college, I had no idea how this happened, but we had 4 foreign policy topics. We debated NATO and European foreign policy. We debated foreign policy toward Africa. We debated fossil fuel consumption and global climate change. And we debated trade toward East Asia in my senior year. I don't think there have been 4 consecutive foreign policy topics since. There tends to be in college a legal topic mixed in there somewhere. But for me, as someone who avoided foreign policy debates in high school, the ability to engage them in college led to it being my concentration, led to it being an interest. And when I took that right turn away from applying to law school, what I found myself when I stayed in the Cambridge area for a year, working afterwards, doing in my spare time, was reading all the foreign policy journals that I had to read for debate in the past. Foreign affairs, foreign policy, the Washington Quarterly, the things that I had to do to cut cards was something that I was doing in my free time. And it led me with that year off to say, why am I thinking about going to law school if all I want to do is continue to think about these foreign policy issues? And that led me to look for a career in foreign policy rather than just being something that I engaged with in a game. The trailblazer who led me to think about where I could take this activity was a guy named Mike Mazar. Mike Mazar was a debater at Georgetown who was an NDT finalist in 1986. He debated in high school at Loyola, the same high school that Neil Katyal debated at here in Chicago. Both of them are alums from that program. What Mike had done was he had gone to the Center for Strategic and International Studies. He had been hired there for reasons I later found out why. But at the time, the only thing I knew was it was the only person I knew from debate that was doing something other than going to law school and had gone into the foreign policy field to be that kind of mentor or role model that even though I didn't know him at the time, and even though I called and left a message on his voicemail that I never got returned how to get into the field, he was somebody who, by his example, was a direction that I could take a career and think about what do I need to do in order to get to where he is. when I was taking that year off, having won the NDT a year earlier in March, working at the Kennedy School, I applied to graduate schools and got into the master's program at Georgetown in National Security Studies and began to send resumes throughout Washington for internships in the foreign policy field. I blanketed about 30 different think tanks in March of the year after I graduated, in June of the year after I graduated, and didn't get a single bite on any of them, as a Harvard graduate who won the national championship. In September of the year after I graduated, what I subsequently found out was that the counselor at the Center for Strategic International Studies was sitting at the desk of the intern coordinator, filtering through the stack of about 500 resumes for all the people that were applying for internships through that think tank, through the Center for Strategic International Studies, or CSIS, and found the line on my resume about the debate championship. He took the resume to the Vice President for Political Military Studies, which was subsequently called International Security Policy, covered up where I had gone to college, literally blacked out that I had gone to Harvard, left the line that said National Debate Championship. The Vice President looked at it and said, hire me. The Vice President was a guy named Bill Taylor, who had been the debate coach at West Point. And he knew about the research skills and the experience that debate could bring that you couldn't get anywhere else. So even though that was the third time I had sent a resume, it just got across somebody's desk by accident, that got into the hands of somebody who had an experience with debate and knew about the research skills and critical thinking skills that this activity brought. That was how I got my first internship and began a path on a job into CSIS. And it was because of that debate connection, both in Mike's case and in Bill Taylor's case. What I subsequently found out is that the reason that Mazar was at CSIS is because Taylor had hired him. And the reason why the internship is named for Taylor is because Taylor hired the debaters. And that's the circle in CSIS that led to a relationship with the policy debate community going forward because of the research and critical thinking skills that they know that debaters have. Having started that internship in about September of 1992, the first time that North Korea threatened to withdraw from the Non-Proliferation Treaty, and non-proliferation was the issue that I had sort of adopted as my pet issue and that we had won the NDT on with an affirmative that lost like 2 debates all year, running nuclear proliferation as an advantage. When North Korea announced its intention to withdraw, I walked into Bill's office and I said, this is serious, what can we do? Bill promoted me to an RA at that point because he knew what I had done on the issue. I got my first op-ed published in a newspaper and began a series of research assistantships for a bunch of projects on foreign policy issues because of that commitment to the issue of nuclear nonproliferation that I had developed in my debate career, mostly as a junior in college. When I left CSIS, I went to the State Department on something that at the time was called a Presidential Management Internship, and now it's called Presidential Management Fellowships, which are the opportunity to go from graduate school into the civil service. And I established the Taylor internship because of my experiences in sending blind resumes around and looking for a better way. A lot of you who have played baseball will probably, I'm that coach that always tells you leave the dugout better than you found it, leave something better than you found it. That was an effort to try and leave the pathway from debate to the policy world better than I had found it, where it wasn't just an alternative to law school, but it was something that made so much sense, where we did this in an educational lab, or we practiced doing it as an extracurricular activity in high school and college, to then be able to go into the professional world and do it, rather than just think we're going to law school because we're trained to think a certain linear way, but to look for another alternative and to keep doing what we did in this game in the real world with real policy consequences. I left the State Department in about 18 months, probably for reasons, I think, that are similar to why I said we all love this game so much here. I was too independent, I didn't feel at peace in the bureaucracy, I didn't feel I could make enough of a difference. The portfolio that I had in the State Department was literally managing political military relations with Israel, which amounted to coordinating a semi-annual conference between the State Department and the Israeli Defense Force for strategic planning talks. And outside of managing those 2 conferences, that was pretty much it. So I felt like I was kind of pigeonholed as an event planner and wanted to not do one thing a mile deep and an inch wide, but to broaden out and do something a mile wide and an inch deep. To not be a single subject expert, but to be able to cross across issues the way that I had in debate, thinking about how this adds interrelated counterplans to the case debate to everything else, and look across those advantages. That left me thinking out of place in the federal bureaucracy, at least at that level, at the civil service. So I left the State Department and went into a PhD program where, again, Mazar was the trailblazer. Mike had gone to get a PhD in a discipline called policy studies that didn't exist prior to 1980. And in part, he had done it because he had also gotten his master's degree, he had done the coursework, he wasn't looking to do a tenure-track professor, he didn't want to do a theory-heavy dissertation, he just wanted to do something that was more similar where he could do a dissertation that was more policy analysis and policy analytical. More of what we did in this activity at a PhD level. He had graduated a couple of years before I did, encouraged me to apply for it. I went into it, and subsequently, 8 years later, came out with a dissertation in 2006, and a PhD in policy studies that I now have. Every one of those experiences is from either a connection that I had in debate, from an argument that I did in debate, from a way that I was trained to think in debate, and that opened up a career in foreign policy analysis at a time that it didn't exist prior to that. About a year later, after I'd gone back to CSIS, the founder of CSIS was leaving the organization. And they were having an internal review from top to bottom about all the different departments. I had been hired back to CSIS not as a research assistant, but now as the Deputy Director of Studies at the administration level, working on the quality and the substantive direction of all the projects throughout the organization. In those internal debates, most people wanted to kill the journal. They didn't think it contributed to policy impact. They didn't think it made a difference in actual legislation. They thought it was too academic and too far removed. And in those internal debates, I was the one that stood up and said, this is how I learned foreign policy. It's from the articles and things like the Washington Quarterly, from foreign affairs, from foreign policy. And think tanks should have at least an arm of the organization, in my opinion, that taught the future generations, the graduate students, the advanced undergraduates, what it was that was going on in the real world before they got into the foreign policy world. I thought it was the educational arm that CSIS needed to preserve. They didn't want to spend a lot of money on it. They basically said, we don't know anyone else that knows what to do with this. Do you want the job? And that has been my dream job in this field, and is something that I've now done for close to 20 years, which is about 10 times longer than most people hold, the time that most people hold jobs in DC. Because it's the perfect fit of that depth across all foreign policy, security policy issues, while being able to shape the arguments not only of myself, but of other people in the field to best help them to convey the argument that they're trying to make to somebody that's not on the same page with them. How in a written form do you convince that judge or that reader out there without being able to read their face what your argument is in a way that I have been trained to do from the debate experience? That's a long litany of what that background is. All of this happens in the first 5 years after I leave the professional experience, and all of it is because of this activity and things that I did with it after winning the NDT. The only thing that winning the NDT mattered was that line on the internship and getting the internship there. The rest of it, nobody cared. It was what you did once you got out of there with the skills that you had learned from the activity. While I slept, what I want to do in this section is introduce you to a series of people that went through an experience of mine that is similar. There's a couple things that I want to establish beforehand to get you to understand what some of the differences are. First, foreign policy analysis. Policy is not politics. I can't tell you the number of times that I have heard the argument come up in a debate round about Ted Cruz being a debater. I got news for you. Ted Cruz didn't go into policy analysis, and he didn't do policy debate. He did parliamentary debate. He's not an example of somebody who went into the field that we're talking about in policy analysis. About 3 days ago, just randomly, one of the things, the newsletters I got from CSIS was this Global Economics Monthly. They gave this paragraph, which is one of the best expressions I've heard about the difference between policy and politics. One of the things that's changed over time, as I come out of the activity, is the public forum didn't exist in the past. To me, the marriage of skills that you get in policy and public forum is the difference between policy analysis from policy debate and persuasion and public speaking skills from public forum. The only thing about debate that you are going to get hired in speaking is if you go into auctioneering, if you speak at a pace that we spoke at, right? But you get the skills to be able to demonstrate yourself in front of public, and the persuasion skills that you get from other activities in speech and forensics more broadly, to me are more analogous to sort of politics or the political figures that go and give speeches rather than the analytical work that goes into policy that is developed at this level. Not just at the high school level, but then it's further refined and developed at the college level, where there's more research because there's frankly less class time, right? You'll have way too much class time during the school year to bury yourself in a whole slew of research like you're able to do over the course of the summer. So that's one difference, is understanding the difference between policy or the analytical work in the substance of governing, and politics, or the public affairs part of the game that not many people from policy debate go into. I'm talking about the policy side of this. Analysis versus advocacy. An analyst is somebody who can see both sides of an argument. When I was thinking about this right around the time that I locked in that I was coming in was when Barack Obama gave his farewell address in January of 2017. And he talked about, this is about the indiscrimination policy. He's talking about not just the limits of what policy can do in fighting discrimination, but in the ability to see yourself walk in someone else's shoes. Something that the increasing partisanship of policy in the 20 years that I've been gone has made it more and more difficult to see across Democrats to Republicans or from one racial group to another. He continues to talk about this in a lot of cases about the ability of whites to see the world from a black perspective and blacks to see the world from the white perspective that had just led, in many people's opinion, to Trump being elected. And Atticus Finch is the lawyer that Gregory Peck played in the 1960 film From To Kill a Mockingbird, who I believe is like the #7 all-time great fictional character in American literature or something like that, about his ability to see the world through someone else's eyes as he defended black defendants in the South in the 1950s in that story. The ability to see that both sides of the debate is something that Neil demonstrated when he advocated for Gorsuch to be the Supreme Court judge in that NPR story that I mentioned at the beginning of this, back on February 2nd after Gorsuch had been nominated. To be a Democratic lawyer to cross the aisle and support a Republican was something that was developed by the ability to see the other side of the argument in debate, having to debate both the affirmative and the negative, and know what the other side's argument was going to be. That's not something that a strict advocate who only argues for one side of an argument does. A strict advocate can be better if they're doing it, but it's the ability to sort of force yourself to see both sides of an argument, to weigh competing policy alternatives, that is the analytical side that leads to this community of foreign policy analysis going forward. That's one difference. Understanding foreign policy analysis, that should be policy underline, not politics. Foreign policy analysis rather than politics and advocacy organizations. But something changed in 1980 that led for this opening of the professional field that was only going the route of lawyers for people that had debated prior to it. Mike hadn't just gone into the field of foreign policy analysis, Mike Mazar, by accident. A couple things were going on in the real world that led to a greater demand for policy and analysts in a professional context. One of them is what was happening in academia. In the 1980s, academia was starting to move more and more for analytical reasons to shy away from contemporary policies as case studies in academic work. That if you were studying contemporary policy, you were not being truly academic or theoretical enough. And there was also sort of a quantitative hegemony almost, a statistical analysis that was starting to come to fruition and shying away from qualitative work and interview-based research that existed. In the 1980s, there's a separate branch of academia that opens up entirely, known as policy studies or public policy. It only exists in a couple of pockets. There's obviously a DC pocket at places like Georgetown. Maryland, whose school of public policy that I got the PhD from, was not established until 1981. There has subsequently been a pocket in the Texas area, especially after a bunch of money from the Bush family went into some of the schools down there, like Rice, like Texas A&M, like SMU, and elsewhere. And this alternate academic field begins to open up that looks more at contemporary cases and that uses interview-based research in a policy context as opposed to political science, which had been shying away from it starting at that point. The second thing that changes is CNN gets born. When the Gulf War happens in 1990, what we all now take for granted as cable news was really what started. The need for military analysts to explain what was going on the television, on a 24/7 news channel, was not something that they had planned on hiring full-time, because they didn't plan for the war to happen. This is the first Gulf War, mind you. In that Gulf War, after Saddam invaded Kuwait and was parked next to Saudi Arabia, they started to bring a whole bunch of people from think tanks to give policy analysis for public consumption. Not just in newspapers, not just in long, dense journal articles, not just in monographs and books, but to appear on television and explain what was going on in the real world. That opens up in 1990 this whole demand that leads to an explosion of think tanks because there's a lot more money in that field as they are asked to appear on news programs as guests or guest analysts, and that brings attention to some of those think tanks, even if those analysts aren't paid, because they need that kind of analysis to explain to the public what's going on in that case. So around the 1980s to 1990, when I stopped debating, is when this field opens up. It didn't exist before. What is different about the US system from others is what's called the revolving door. The revolving door means that people in the US government who are political appointees, there's a bunch of different ways to get into the US government. You can be a foreign service officer, you can be a civil servant that is a lifetime employee, you can be a military officer. But one of the ways that they get experts going from outside that cycle back into academia or into think tanks is this revolving door, where someone will go into government for a 2 to 4 year period, and they will leave after their administration or after they're burned out, and go back to an academic setting where they can do longer term research, and then go back into government and put that research into practice themselves. That does not exist in most other countries. Not just non-democracies, but even in places like France and Germany, they don't have that revolving door. If you are a member of the Foreign Service, you are a member of the Foreign Service for life in other countries. In this country, you rotate in and out. That allows you to sort of incubate long-term ideas in academia or in think tanks, and put them into practice yourself and not relying on government officials to go ahead and do that. When you marry that explosion of interest in this parallel academic field with the demand in the media and the opportunity to move in and out of government, you get this explosion of foreign policy analysis starting right almost exactly when I leave the NDT and leave debate, that opens up this channel that is an alternative to going into law for foreign policy debaters. The problem is, most people don't know who those people are. So I'm going to introduce you to some of them. I'm going to break this down into 3 groups. The first group of people is a series of people in the foreign policy analysis community who I either debated against, coached, or judged in the couple of years that I was either in college when they were in high school, or that I was coaching my brother up until 1994, through the variety of these channels. That's this first group. The second group that I'll introduce to you is a series of the Taylor interns, or people who interned at CSIS that I met through that channel. And then the third group is people who I have met professionally that I subsequently found out that they had debated retroactively. And I didn't know them in the debate context, but found out that they had received their training uniquely in this extracurricular activity to look at policy-oriented, problem-solving, plan-based debate. The first one is someone who I've already introduced to you by name before, which is Colin Call. Colin, with his goofy picture, he'll be the first one to admit that's goofy, was the deputy assistant to President Obama and the principal assistant to Vice President Biden. Being the deputy assistant to Obama meant that he was the intel briefer every morning that gave Obama the intelligence briefing for those 2+ years of the briefing. He had to use his debate skills to comb through the presidential brief, to be able to explain what was on the brief, to answer questions from the president about what issues were most important in his mind, as well as for other advisors, and to be able to be quick, condensed, concise analysis of what the most important strategic issues were on a daily basis to President Obama. That's an ex-debater. He also, prior to that, got some training, having served as a professor at the University of Minnesota, got an offer through the Council on Foreign Relations, which is another think tank, for something called the International Affairs Fellowship, to go and get some government experience when he served as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense. What that means, and I'll explain some of these different titles. Underneath the Secretary of Defense or the cabinet members, there's usually about 3 layers, and the Assistant Secretary of State or Defense or other layers is the principal regional coordinator for that area. So the Assistant Secretary of Defense for the Middle East is the principal advisor on all Middle Eastern issues to the Secretary of Defense. He was the deputy at that time, serving on an academic liaison, or sort of fellowship program, basically, which was part of his training before he got hired as a political appointee to go into the government. So he used a couple of different angles, going from academic experience to go into professional experience, and ending up at the end of the administration briefing the president on a daily basis. He was an awfully good talker. Kathleen Hicks debated at Lake Braddock High School, never debated in college. She was somebody who I debated against when I was debating in New York and Edgemont. She is now the Vice President at the Center for Strategic International Studies. But prior to that, the Undersecretary for Policy was a woman named Michelle Flournoy in the Obama administration, who was the principal person for all policy issues underneath the Secretary of Defense and that person's deputy. The next level is the Undersecretary of Defense. She was that person's deputy, or the fourth layer in the bureaucracy, which is a Senate confirmable position that was responsible for developing the 2012 Defense Strategic Guidance during the Obama administration and the 2010 Quadrennial Defense Review, or the military strategy for the next 4 years going forward. Most people have no idea that Kath debated because she wasn't a hugely successful high school debater. She didn't go on to debate in college. But I debated her about 3 times when we were both debating at the same age. She ended up back at CSIS. In fact, some of you who may know Seth Gannon, who is a coach at Westminster, is another person who received one of the Taylor Internship Fellows and stayed in this activity. When I left CSIS, Seth, who still works on sort of a stringer basis for the health policy division of CSIS on a part-time basis from Oregon, made sure that the internship that was established was landed in Kath's program. What Seth didn't know until I texted him 2 days ago is that Kath was a debater, and he had not a clue that she had debated in high school before. Because people just don't talk about these things in the hallways after what their experience was in high school, and they don't know the common experiences that they share. I'm going to start to pick up the pace a little bit on some of these other examples. The third example is a guy named Mike Toms. Mike debated for Georgetown, graduating in 1992. He is now a professor of political science at Stanford. He is strictly an academic and is mostly on some of the international economic issues. Part of the reason I mentioned Mike is as a story. He's a premier academic in this field on international economic policy, on development policy, and a range of other issues. One of the very few wins that I remember from debating was debating Mike Toms in the octafinals of the TOC my senior year when Mike was a junior. The reason I remember that debate is because when I applied to Harvard, I sent a note to Dallas Perkins, who is the retiring coach now, saying that I was coming to Harvard. The response that I got at the time was, debate can't help you get in. When you're admitted, come talk to me. Because we have no pull with the admissions office at that time. It's changed since then. The reason I mention this story is because Sherry Hall, who was the other coach at Harvard, judged that octafinals debate. Mike ran an extra-topicality violation saying that moving targets were bad and a conditional counterclaim. We beat the extra-topicality violation, applied the voting issue to the conditional counterclaim as a voting issue, and Sherry's ballot said those who live by the sword, die by the sword. Good job, look forward to next year. It's hard not to remember those stories. Danny Ryder. The graduate of Northwestern debate. For those of you who have heard the name Gordon Mitchell, he was Gordon's partner when Gordon was a senior, and is, I believe, still the chair of the political science department. I can't remember if that's still true. He was definitely from 2007 to 2013 in that area. Danny wrote a couple of different processes, one of which was an international security article in 1995 saying that preemptive wars almost never happen, which when the Iraq War came up in 2001 was cited over and over and over again because it turned out to be wrong once the U.S. invaded Iraq preemptively and using, in all seriousness, what it actually did was it demonstrated the distinction between a preemptive war and a preventive war, which when you get into that level of international security issues matters a great deal. But it's not the kind of thing you sort of throw around the water cooler. But his article that had been previously written demonstrated what that difference was and why the Iraq War was not actually a case of preemptive war, but was a preventive war. He's also subsequently written some other books, including this one on how wars end in 2009, some of the work that he's done, again shaping the type of policy debates and writing some of the cards that we use in this activity going forward. Ryan Goodman, the debater at the University of Texas. He is on that grid that I showed you before, and I'll show you again. I think they were the 8th seed that year. He was paired with a guy who was the top speaker at the NDT that year, is a professor of law at NYU, and was special counsel to the Department of Defense's lawyer at the end of the Obama administration in 2015 and 2016. Why is that significant? Part of it is because at the end of the Obama administration, they were trying desperately to figure out how to get out of Guantanamo Bay, and some of the issues that would come up legally in treating the prisoners that were there, despite the promise that had been made at the beginning of the Obama administration in 2009 to shut, or 2008 actually, to shut down Guantanamo, that ended up being much more difficult than people realized. He's done a tremendous amount of work on promoting human rights through international law, both in what he has written and in a blog that he writes, as well as a journal, as well as the work that he did at the Department of Defense. The next one of these is a guy named Matt Waxman. Matt is another example of somebody who debated in high school. He debated at Johns Hopkins High School in Connecticut. He did not debate in college. He went to Yale, which didn't have a debate program. And he is not only a law professor at Columbia, but he was in the State Department, the Defense Department, the National Security Council, and was the first Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Detainee Affairs, which came up during the Bush administration after all of the controversy over waterboarding and some of the other torture methods that the administration had used. Giving this as an example to prove that debaters don't always win, Matt internally fought in the administration for the administration to follow the Geneva Conventions in their treatment of U.S. captives, and he lost that debate internally in the fight within the administration, despite being there and advocating for it. Sometimes you can't do everything when you're a 20-something and you're that deep in the bureaucracy. Dan Nexon was a debater at Georgetown Day in 1991, Harvard up to 1995, where he was a TOC finalist back at GDS. He's now an associate professor of government. He also took one of these fellowships to get some experience in the Pentagon to understand what policy making in the real world is like so that he could take it into his academic experience. Just to prove that sometimes these people have a sense of humor, at least nothing better to do, he's apparently also written literally an article about how Harry Potter explains geopolitics. There's actually somebody else who's not a debater who's written something about zombie states that is a total Walking Dead spin-off that's made him a lot of money somehow. This is one of my favorite examples. Evan Medeiros was a debater who went to the University of Michigan summer camp when I taught there one summer. He debated for a small school in Rhode Island called Classical High School, and similar to Matt Waxman, was a one-man wrecking crew in New England in a program that didn't have any reputation or any experience for the school itself. They were the ones that made those teams as successful as they were at that time. Evan subsequently went on to debate for about a year or two at Bates College, which doesn't have much of a college program, but a small one that had them debating a little bit. He also went, after he got his Doctor of Philosophy at King's College, I believe, or somewhere in London, worked as a policy advisor at the Department of Treasury on China affairs, and he's a China specialist. Do any of you remember him from the China topic, or know of him? For anybody who went to Georgetown's camp last year, he came and spoke to the group as well. He had started as the director, or sort of the deputy in the national security, the second level of regional analysts that is responsible for one country at a time, and was the China expert. And in the second term of the Obama administration was promoted to be the National Security Council's senior director for Asia, meaning he's responsible not just for China policy as he was in the first term, but for all Asia policy as he was going forward. That included the proposal for the Sunnyland Summit, included the summit in the fall of 2014, and numerous other security and economic dialogue interactions and planning those events going forward, as well as dealing with the Chinese at a number of levels. He also has subsequently gone on outside, so he's now writing a lot of cards that you may have read going forward outside of the activity. That's 8, for starters, people who all I debated, and they rarely are known as being former debaters for a variety of reasons we'll talk about at the end. I'll give you 5 more. Taylor interns, people who got their internships going forward. Kaylin Talmadge, does anyone know who David Glass is? David Glass is a assistant coach at Harvard. He is literally the smartest guy I've ever met in my life. He works on major medical breakthroughs as a day job. He teaches now at Harvard Medical School. In his spare time, he coached debate, including my crosstown rivals when I was in high school. He was the freshman advisor when I was at Harvard, and he still coaches now at Harvard as he lives in Cambridge when he's not flying up to Switzerland for some of the medical stuff that he works there. He also writes off-Broadway plays in his spare time because he's that good. David has called me and told me to hire 2 people as interns. One was Caitlin. Caitlin was described to me as the best debater of the 1990s. Who here is from Greenhill? She's an alum. Caitlin also gave one of the speeches at Georgetown last year, for those of you that came. She's written a couple of things not only on nuclear terrorism, which was a Washington Quarterly article that was published in 2007. Her dissertation has just been named in academia. She's an assistant professor or a rising tenure-track professor at George Washington. Her dissertation has just been named the best book by the International Studies Association. and she wrote an article on international security that was published during this last year's debate topic about why all the war scenarios that you're playing with China could go nuclear. So if you haven't heard of cards, you should have come. Others. Mike Horowitz. Mike Horowitz was a debater at Lexington and Emory. Ironically, Mike Horowitz was a student of mine at an American University summer camp who then applied for the Taylor internship at CSIS, got the Taylor internship, and on one of the first 2 days of the internships reminded me that he had been in my class, and I had no idea whatsoever. I had completely forgotten him in its entirety. He is subsequently now starting a program within the University of Pennsylvania to be much more active in policy affairs. Not to have Pennsylvania be as focused only on academic issues, but also to magnify its impact in the foreign policy and foreign policy debate world, in the real world, at what's called Perry Worldhouse. He does a ton of work on drones and artificial intelligence, and is an extremely good follow on Twitter, especially if you like the Patriots, because he does a ton of stuff with them. He also got one of these fellowships from the Council on Foreign Relations to go from academia, to get some experience in government, to get a better understanding about what it's like to actually be in policymaking, and take that work back with him to improve the academic analysis that he did, or does, now at the University of Pennsylvania, when he was an advisor to the Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Force Development, meaning the defense forces that we use throughout the world. Nirav Patel was the Taylor intern, I believe, in 2004, debated for North Texas Debate, and was a finalist in CETA Nationals when he was there. He is now, went into the administration with the guy who at CSIS was the vice president at the time that Nirav interned there, named Kurt Campbell. Kurt was the Assistant Secretary of State for East Asia. How many of you read cards by Kurt on the China topic? Or think you may have read cards by Kurt on the China topic? Kurt was the senior policy advisor responsible for Asia policy in the administration. The article that was published in Foreign Policy about the pivot to Asia, that was written by Hillary Clinton, was the brainchild in part of Kurt, who was the Assistant Secretary at that time that worked with Secretary Clinton to author that article. Nirav was Kurt's right hand, just as Kurt was Secretary Clinton's right hand on Asia policy. Nirav's, most of his work as the Deputy Assistant Secretary of State focused on Southeast Asia, but has done a lot of other work and now is the head of a consulting firm called the Asia Group. So he also moves into another area of foreign policy analysis, not just academia, not just think tanks, but advising corporate organizations in that case as well, which is another layer of foreign policy analysis and advice. John Warden is another Northwestern alum, 2009. John is younger than a lot of these other people, but I heard his cards at least twice on the topic last year. These massive impact cards on China policy. Your mouth is open like, that's that guy? Yeah. He interned in, and remember this title, the Assistant Secretary of Defense Policy for Counter-Weapons of Mass Destruction, because you're going to see that title again in a minute. And was a senior policy analyst now, again, at a consulting firm, as there's more opportunities, even still, opening up at the end of the 2000s for people to go into foreign policy analysis and advice, in this case in the consulting business, beyond just academia and think tanks or working in government or being in the media. The fifth one of the Taylor interns that I want to mention, because she's probably one of my favorite people anywhere, is Vicky Suarez-Palomo, who debated for Emory up until 2005. What's remarkable about Vicky's track is she didn't stay in one channel. If I think I broadened out to leave the State Department to do a range of security policy stuff, she blew the roof off of that range of policy issues. She got the internship and worked with a guy named Bob Einhorn, who is known among Chinese diplomats as the dentist because he drives them into submission on all these foreign policy issues left and right. Learned working with him, crossed from that internship to go work for a guy named Joe Cirincione, who is a disarmament advocate that works at the Plowshares Fund and is very public. You may see him on a lot of Sunday morning news programs or NPR shows on non-proliferation on Iran, North Korea, or other issues. Worked for him, piggybacked that to meet a guy named Gene Sperling, who subsequently goes into the Obama administration as the counselor to the Secretary of the Treasury. Vicky goes in as his special assistant or the advisor to him for the Secretary of Treasury's work. What's significant about that timing of the Secretary of the Treasury, 2009 to 2010? Say again? Global financial crisis. That's the most important job in the government at the beginning of the Obama administration. It's the Secretary of the Treasury and trying to calm, along with the auto bailout and a number of other things. But among the jobs you wanted in the administration, she was that in those rooms, working with the counselor who's the advisor and learning from Sperling's tutelage in that position. She subsequently goes from being under his wing to getting her own policymaking job as that Deputy Assistant Secretary. That secretary job is the difference between being an analyst and a decision maker, and is the lowest rung of decision making for entry-level decision makers as they start to get into their experience age. And is in that job for about 4 years. Subsequently decides she wants to get out of Treasury, goes to the Secretary of Education, and works on strategy and planning for education policy from 2014 to 2016. She subsequently left government entirely just before the election, if I remember correctly, and is now working in local Colorado politics and working at an organization that is based in San Diego on grassroots political mobilization for a number of the issues that she cares about related to the track record of financial education and security issues that she has developed a career now over those first 10 years professionally since she's been out of college. To have that level of experience at the age of 33 is unbelievable. That's 5 more. Now you got 13 people besides me that have gone from this activity into foreign policy analysis and do professionally what we pretend to do here. I got 8 more. People who I met professionally, which gives it a solid 21. Mike Mazar was the first one. Mike I mentioned to you before, who had debated at Loyola and was debated in Georgetown in 1986. The funny thing about Mike is after he and I got a chance to work together, he not only was the first one who was at CSIS that I subsequently went to follow him, he got the job as the editor of the Washington Quarterly and left, which is why I ended up getting it. It was unrelated, but we were both in the same building and both kind of ended up in the same track, with me sort of one step behind him along those ways. He got some experience working at the Joint Chiefs of Staff at the beginning of the Obama administration, again for an academic to get real policy experience, to be able to make their academic and analytical work better by having had that experience from being in the shoes of the policymaker themselves. The funny thing about Mike afterwards is I was talking to him at one point, and we were just kind of shooting the breeze, and he said to me at one point, he said, the funny thing about the debate world is, I get these random calls every once in a while. There was even some guy that left a voicemail for me a few years ago that wanted to get a job. And I had to say, Mike, that was me. You didn't return the call at that point. But the connections at that point was what led me to be hired in CSIS as a Taylor and his support for debating what we can do. Philip Zelikow debated for Redlands. This is really before my time. It's probably the only one that's really significantly before my time. Zelikow, some of you may know, you may know him as the director of the 9/11 Commission, but probably not. That's probably even farther away from your experience right now. He now is at the University of Virginia, heading up the largest center on the American presidency, but he was integrally involved with Condoleezza Rice and others at the time of German reunification, and wrote what might be the definitive book of the diplomatic history of the German reunification process during the Bush administration with Condoleezza Rice, who subsequently goes on in future administrations to be the National Security Advisor and the Secretary of State. Zelikow was someone who debated back in the 60s, and is the only one that I really know who debated prior to this opening of the window in the 1980s and 1990s for foreign policy analysis to do it professionally. Jeff Lewis was another one of these that I don't think many people knew he debated. He debated in college at Augustine, Illinois. I don't know how successful he was in college debate. He was not someone who was at sort of finals of the NDT or anything like that. But he is probably the single most active blogger, Twitter, and everything else on non-proliferation policy right now. Some of you who ran proliferation issues may recognize the name because he does a tremendous amount of stuff on disarmament policy going forward, and has that from his experience on sort of debate. He talked a number of times about the influence that it's had on his life. 6 others. Erin Simpson is the best Twitter follow on the planet. She is extraordinarily funny. She is extraordinarily sharp. She has experience as an assistant professor at the Marine Corps. She has worked in a consulting firm called Karis Associates for a number of years, and actually served in Afghanistan advising on counterinsurgency strategy after the Afghanistan war. I forgot what year it was that she served there. She is now the co-host of a podcast called Bombshell, which is tongue-in-cheek title because it's 3 women talking about security affairs issues. and their guests are all women to date, although I think they're reassessing whether they want to continue to do that. But it's a podcast that started at the beginning of this year and is extremely good, also because it does a lot of sort of pop culture stuff. They're not these complete nerds that have no contact with common culture or anything like that. So she's a very good follow on Twitter as well. Jay Finch is a Kentucky alum. Remember I told you to remember the title of that office? Principal Director for Countering Weapons of Mass Destruction? How do you think he got his internship? Jay Finch is the next debater that debated in Kentucky up until 1996. He was the former Deputy Director of Mideast Policy at the Department of Defense. What's different about Jay, as I was telling Dave beforehand, Jay is one of the few people on this list who actually stays in government. He's actually a civil servant that works in the Pentagon, which I think is actually a little bit inconsistent with a lot of other people's experience who either stay in academia full-time or just do a fellowship to get a taste of what policymaking is like, or just going on political appointees into the administration. He actually stays in full-time and manages to do a career in foreign policy analysis with any administration of whatever political stripe for at least now, it's got to be going on 2 decades, or close to at least a decade and a half, either through the Air Force or through the civilian side of the Office of Secretary of Defense. Rajiv Shah was the director for the U.S. Agency for International Development. I'm not positive he debated at Wiley Cross High School. I am positive he debated in Michigan. There is another Rajiv Shah that debated at the same time from Michigan. I'm not absolutely certain that he went to Wiley Groves, but he debated in high school regardless one way or the other. Was an incredibly successful leader of the Agency for International Development during the Obama administration, including leading U.S. responses to the Haiti earthquake, literally 9 days after his job started, and the Ebola outbreak in Africa, which the administration generally gets extraordinarily good reviews for helping make it be much less fatal than it was, and was part of the Secretary General's high-level panel on responding to global pandemic threats in 2015, which is an incredibly successful, very high-profile policy-making job, as opposed to policy analysis job that we talked about going forward. I got 2 last ones for you. The one that kills me about this one, Vipin Narang, coming from somebody who is a proliferation analyst, Vipin has, in my opinion, written the most impactful book on non-proliferation policy and why nuclear proliferation matters with his dissertation. He changed the argument from being that it matters whether a country gets nuclear weapons or not, to what doctrine that country pursues. Meaning, there are 3 choices that he lays out in his dissertation that a new nuclear state might pursue as the rules governing nuclear use and the policies that they pursue for nuclear deterrence threats. And breaks down which ones are specifically more dangerous, rather than just having this broad, any country that gets new nuclear weapons is dangerous, but actually specifies which ones are more dangerous and why. That won the prize for best dissertation in promoting international peace in 2010, and the book that he subsequently turned the dissertation into won the International Studies Association Award, which I believe was the same award that Caitlin won 2 years later. And he is now entering the second phase, which is not about strategies of nuclear deterrence for new nuclear states, but strategies of nuclear proliferation and how nuclear states do it. He is literally taking the nuclear proliferation field to a 2.0 generation that breaks down into more specific areas how those people are pursuing nuclear weapons and when and why they're dangerous. What blows my mind about this is I didn't know Vipin had debated until I asked people like Aaron and Mike Horowitz who some of the other examples were that I may not know. And he said that he had debated at Bellarmine Prep in San Diego when he was in high school. Didn't end up debating in college because he became an engineering major at Stanford. There was no way to do an engineering degree and debate as well. So it's another example of somebody who only debated in high school and still to this day credits the analytical processes that he learned in debate at the high school level, even without debating in college, for the way that he approaches his professional job. The last one is not only specific here because it's at Northwestern, but is generally considered the best college debater of the 1990s. When I mentioned before that Caitlin was recommended to me as the best high school debater of the 1990s, Mike Gottlieb won the NDT twice at the end of the 1990s. He was subsequently appointed as White House counsel and special assistant to President Obama for a variety of things, including being detailed to Afghanistan to deal with detainee policy in the aftermath of the Bush administration and establishing some principles of order to govern the detainee policies under the new administration, although he went in about a year after the administration started. But that was what he was principally detailed to Afghanistan to do. This quote was something that was on a website that I thought was particularly impactful because of the role that Scott Dettridge who was the coach at Northwestern back when I was debating as well, made on Mike. And to talk about that sort of impact where he literally shapes Supreme Court opinions, speeches to the president, or even speeches to the Taliban leaders based on the principles that he learned in this activity. To take that with him professionally into the real world based on what he learned here and help make better policy was one of the best examples I saw of what was written, because it was one of these rare biographical looks to someone that was talking on the public record about the impact the debate made in their lives. I have inundated you with 21 people that's probably bored you to tears because I want you to understand how deep this goes. These people are not known for being debaters. These people are not known for having gone into it. Most of them, by the time they get to positions where they have major influence, after they've gone from high school, they've gone through college or college debate, they go into graduate school, they do internships, they get initial jobs, they work their way up through the system, they develop sort of expertise and experience as to how this game or this educational lab differs from the real world, and even at extraordinarily young ages in some cases, like Vicky or others, can make a difference by getting into policy-making positions and make this game real. To do it for the stakes of policy in whatever field interests them most, whether it's in security policy, international economic development policy, education policy, financial policy with the Treasury, whatever the case is, they came from this activity and learned the basics here and took it with them to make U.S. policy better. I believe there's 5 reasons why those people are not known in the debate community for the impact they made, and why that makes a difference to how this game is being played today. The first, let me be clear about this. I am not dissing academics in debate. This activity would not exist without academics in debate, without full-time professors who stay in academics, who remain as coaches, who help influence the theoretical development of debate activities. However, the feedback loop in debate is by definition biased toward that academic route. The people that go into the policy world don't have time to stay connected for the same reason that I slept or I left this activity for 20 years. When you are doing those jobs, you don't have time, even without the complications of whether they start their own families or not and have young children at home, in being able to take the time to go out in a way that academic professors don't, because it's part of their jobs. If they have debate as their experience, or they have more flexibility in their schedule to be able to go out. The development of that theory and the reasons why policy matters back into policy debate activity is broken because the chain of people that go into the activity have to leave the activity because of the demands of their job. That is not true for the academic track and people that come back in. What that means is that feedback loop is biased in an academic direction for some of the debate in ways that will be clear as to how it has shaped the way the activity has evolved over those 20 years since I've slept. Second, policy advisors are not politicians. They do not generally go out and speak in public unless they have been promoted to that level where secretary is in their title, whether it's deputy assistant secretary, undersecretary, or in the case of the the Agency for International Development, to being the head of the organization itself. Most people who are policy advisors talk to the people who they work for. They don't speak in public, meaning they don't get credit for their work. They don't write cards. They don't go on media appearances because they are advisors to those policymakers. They don't make public appearances, so the practice is done as proprietary advice for government policymakers. That's one of the differences between the policy advisor and the politician or the public figure. Third, that time lag. It takes time to get established. In that period of time, you not only make it possible that the debate world will forget about where you are or where you come from, depending on how high you got in the activity. If you're in the finals of the NDT, they're probably going to remember for some period of time. But obviously not forever, because most of you have no idea who the heck I am. That was 25 years ago, it's a long time. But it takes time, and one of the reasons that happens is because there aren't a lot of people who are here for multi-generations, right? Dave being the exception with the gray-haired crew. But a lot of people stay through their 20s, especially if they start their own families. You don't have all the time to go on the road. The coaches that knew those people leave the activity, and then when those people who used to be debaters get into positions where they might be known because they're academic writing, they get out of the apprenticeship phase and get into the policymaking phase. A lot of the debate players have changed. The coaches have gone. You've got an entire generation that cycles out in about 10 years. So in that period of time, people may say, oh yeah, I kind of remember that Colin debated somewhere. That grid shows you where that he came from. Fourth, when you write a bio, you write where you went to college. You don't write when you debated. I actually make a point on my bios of putting that I debated in the NDT so that if people went into policy debate, I want them to know that they can approach me in ways that I was looking for when I approached Mike Mazar about how to get into this field in the first place. I want them to know that network is out there because this network of people that I talked about works with each other. We can talk in code, not in front of others, but when we talk about the uniqueness of the argument or the impact turn or it internally turns the link or whatever that is, that's a language that we can network with each other and we know each other. We get on much better terms than we were competitors against each other. I get along with Colin miles better than when he was debating and I was debating for Harvard. But because you have that common experience, time passes, you have that shared experience and that shared language, you know who each other is, but it's not publicized because it's not put on anyone's bio. You don't say that you debated. So I didn't know that Vipin debated. People don't know that Kath Hicks debated because it's not on their biographies. It's not on their bylines when they write something for public consumption. Finally, foreign policy successes are quiet. This goes beyond the traditional argument that the media follows bad news, right? So to some extent you may know who people are, but at least if you're in an advisory position or working in the government, the successes in foreign policy are often not known or not public. This isn't just because of something that's intelligence policy. But this, again, earlier this year, in talking about some of the transitions in good foreign policy, the type of diplomatic successes are things that have to stay quiet. If you talk about dealing with cultures where you principally want to preserve a way for them to save face, to take credit for those diplomatic breakthroughs, you can't claim credit for yourself. There's a great book that was based, one of the theoretical bases for my dissertation called Bridging the Gap by a professor from Stanford named Alexander George. It was written in about 1999 or so. The argument that Alexander George makes is how to bridge the gap from academic policy to policy itself. And he makes a couple of arguments. One argument he makes is that strict academics are not very good at writing solvency cards. I'm paraphrasing when I say solvency cards. But the reason why is because academics don't have experience in government for the most part. Hence why that fellowship was established and why so many of the people on this list go into government in order to get experience for themselves and immerse themselves in the environment to understand what are the pressures that shape policy beyond analytical truth. What are the political pressures? What are the budget pressures? What are the other things that force policymakers to make decisions that we may not understand from the outside? That's one reason. They don't write good solvency cards. The second reason that he talks about is because academics are encouraged to make themselves different. The tenure process in academia forces you to make yourself take a stand. Take an argument with a well-established professor. Make a theory that is different that other people are not talking about before. Policymakers are not forced to separate, they are encouraged to bind. How do you build political coalitions? How do you get policies passed? How do you allow other people to take credit for it? So I have no idea how much of the pivot toward Asia Kurt Campbell or Narav Patel wrote, but Secretary Clinton published the article under her name because she had to, because she was a senior policy figure and was writing that. For all I know, she had the entire design of it, but we have no idea outside of it because there is no way that Kurt or Narav are going to say on a public basis, oh yeah, I wrote that piece, it wasn't Secretary Clinton. Their political career is done. They will have no influence whatsoever with anybody else because they can't keep a secret. The secrets in foreign policy in the advisory capacity have to stay secret. These people don't necessarily get credit for it, and even when they do things that take credit, they generally push it toward political figures so they can take the political credit for it and be champions of that cause so that the policy will be sustainable and not just a good analytical idea, but a policy that stays in practice going forward. It has to be married with a policymaker in order to be sustainable going forward. That means for all 5 of these reasons, that litany, that blackjack, 21 people that I laid out that have gone to a career in foreign policy analysis are not known. It is not something that people talk about because it's not a lawyer that everybody remembers winning from debate, but it's somebody that went through a process that's a little longer, a little quieter, a little tougher, a little longer, and a little bit less public, so that it's not remembered where they came from. And it started right around 1990, so you're now seeing a lot of these people get into much more senior positions as they've had a generation of experience, mentoring, interning, studying, writing, learning on a professional capacity beyond just what they did in this debate lab. That's where I was in the 20 years while I was out of debate. A lot of it networks with people that I knew or that I established an instant connection with. One of the odd ones that I didn't even mention on there is about 2 months ago I was at a luncheon at the Council on Foreign Relations, and a guy named Samir Lalwani came up to me. And Samir is now the deputy director at the Stimson Center, which is a think tank in DC for South Asian policy, and does a lot of writing on conflict resolution in South Asia, both India, Pakistan, Afghanistan, and elsewhere. On the margins of this lunch, as we're getting the food, Samir said, yeah, you're not going to remember this, but you judged me at the TOC on the weapons of mass destruction topic in 2001. He had apparently debated at Bellarmine Prep, and is about 4 years younger than Vipin and had debated there. I had no idea that he was there. And he and I had previously been talking about an article that he was going to write for the Washington Quarterly to help write those cards, shape those public debates, and engage in that policy debate on a professional level. I had no idea that he was in the activity or in the professional world, having come from the activity. But he actually took the time to mention it to me, which most people probably wouldn't have. And I probably, it was very odd because that was the 1 year that I came back, having been away for about 20 years. Why do I mention that? Here's the first thing that's happening now in this generation. Not only are a lot of these people coming back to the, or in the professional world at a much more senior level, but a lot of the people on this grid that I mentioned before, and I'll just point that the 6C Texas A was where Ryan Goodman was with Dave Levin. Not only are the people I mentioned before coming into more senior positions in the policy world, these people are coming back to the debate world. The reason I came back, I don't even know if Sean knows the story. The reason I came back in 2014 is because I have a son who is 14 years old, who's now a rising sophomore in high school, and a daughter who is 10, who is a 5th grader. When we were looking at the decision as to what middle school my son was going to go to when he was entering 7th grade 3 years ago, we went to a couple of schools that are different magnet schools in the Fairfax area. One of the things that I wanted to know, particularly because most of my family is in education or psychology, and my brother said, forget about thinking about what high school he wants to go to, you have to think about what college he wants to go to as a 7th grader. I was like, dude, you gotta be kidding me. Like, we can't be fighting these college battles in 7th grade. Part of his argument, and one of the things that I wanted to look at, was to know which of those high schools had debate programs. Where could he have the opportunity, if he wanted to learn it, because it wasn't available at a lot of them. Jefferson had one. The school that he ended up going to, because it's an international baccalaureate or an IB program, whereas Jefferson is a STEM school or a science and tech program. He wanted to go to the international baccalaureate degree because he's not a STEM kid, even though, ironically, the policy debate program is at STEM school in the Fairfax area. A year later, the guy who was the coach at Thomas Jefferson at the time was leaving Thomas Jefferson. And the guy who was the head of student activities at Thomas Jefferson asked around and was apparently told by a couple of other people that because I had been sniffing around the year before, said if you can talk about retirement and become coach, he's the guy to get to coach. At the time, I was leaving, or as my son was getting older, it was clear that he was going to have only about a year left of baseball. And that was where I had been spending a lot of my time in the evenings and on weekends. So as Jeff mentioned in the introduction, the reason why I asked him to say that I was a baseball coach in the beginning is because it had energized my interest in coaching. And that call from the guy who's the head at the TJ basically led to a discussion between me and my wife that said, even though this may be a year earlier for my son, by the time the program gets up and is traveling nationally, he'll be done with baseball, I'll have more time, and it makes sense to come back. It was because of that opportunity to pave the way for my own kids, if they wanted that, that led me to sniff around and got me on the radar screen of the guy who offered me the volunteer position at Thomas Jefferson. Here's why the bracket's up. Guess where else this is happening? Glenbrook South, top team last year. How many of you know Brendan Schuler or of the name Brendan Schuler? How many of you know his dad, Ken Schuler? Top prelim seed, Northern Iowa. The number 2 team that year was Ken Schuler. That's Brendan's dad. Kentucky A, the team that they got upset by in the octafinals. Dave, T.A. McKinney, ring a bell?
Oh, you found that later.
T.A. McKinney was one of the top couple speakers at this program, has now established, having moved to New York and is in finance, a debate program that did not exist at Mamaroneck High School in New York as of a year ago, to provide the opportunity for his son to do policy debate where it was not offered by his school previously. Got Mamaroneck in the back? There we go. That's T.A. among other people led that at the school. Neil Cadiel. Casey Anderson was the debater at Georgetown, I believe the year before this NDT, was the top team at Georgetown. Neil Cadiel we talked about before about being a lawyer. Neil's son and Casey's son are both at Sidwell Friends. And I can't remember if one of them is here or if it was at another program. It's not here, it's another program. Those are examples of all people of my generation who are starting to come back and at least providing, or in some cases encouraging. The funny story about Brendan is that Ken told me over and over again, he did not encourage his kid to go into debate because he wanted his kid to make the decision for himself. It was his wife who basically said, the only reason you have your stuff together is because of debate. I want our kid to have that opportunity too. So she was the one that told him to go into the activity and opened the door for him to at least have the experience. Obviously, it was up to him whether he wanted to pursue it going forward or not. These people are coming out of the woodwork because of the activity and what it did for them, as opposed to what it is doing now. Not as opposed to what it's doing now, just for their kids to do it now. So here's the difference that I found in the activity going forward. I don't want to talk about this in the debate terms as much because I don't think it's linked in debate terms. I've had a couple of discussions with people that, having left this activity for 20 years, people have asked me, what's the biggest difference you see? And my answer is always not about what's going on in the debate world, but what's going on in the real world. How is the world different now, 2014 at least through 2017, or my return to the policy debate activity, from the world in 1990 going forward? And there's two fundamental differences that I immediately thought about before I even came to the activity as to what some of the biggest differences were. First, Christmas of the year that I graduated from college was the year that the Soviet flag came down. My entire debate experience was with the Soviet Union in its existence. The fear of major power warfare between the United States and other countries was much more prevalent in the 1980s than it is now. Than it has been certainly up until about, let's say, 6 months ago. That difference is one of the biggest differences in the activity. Objective data, I didn't go through a ton of stuff for this, but the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists, which is based here in Chicago, has published something called the Doomsday Clock, which is an indicator that it gives for public consumption as to how close we are to some kind of global holocaust. When it was started in 1947, they put that clock at 7 minutes to midnight. You can tell that I'm terrible at graphics since I just cut and paste words into this. And then I put this part together yesterday, at least. At the end of the 1960s, it's still at 10 minutes to midnight. What I was surprised by is that the Cuban Missile Crisis didn't really move the minute meter that much as it did. But just to give you some indication about it, by the time the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty was signed, because this obviously is about nuclear weapons at the time it was created in the early 40s, or the late 40s, it's still a fair distance away. By the time 1980 comes around, Reagan enters office, and I'm about 2 years away from a high school debate career, the clock gets moved forward to 7 minutes to midnight. In 1981, with the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the U.S. Olympic boycott, it goes to 4 minutes to midnight. So this is closer, not every time. There's a couple of things I left out, like the U.S. detonation of the hydrogen bomb, but it's extremely close compared to other times in the 60s. It gets to 3 minutes to midnight with a lot of the rhetoric about the Strategic Defense Initiative, or Star Wars policy by the Reagan administration. And at this point, I'm entering high school. By the time that we win the NDT, that's when the Cold War collapses. That entire period during the 1980s until the Berlin Wall falls in 1989, and the clock gets set backwards to 10 minutes to midnight, and then the Soviet flag comes down and goes all the way back to 17 minutes to midnight, is debates under the shadow of major power warfare. That it is a real fear among a number of people at that time, at least by this indicator, and there's others if you look at detailed public opinion surveys. One of the interesting things is that most of the data that I use now for public opinion surveys and how it changes over time are a lot of public opinion databases that were not founded until after 1991, or in some cases even the 2000s. Just the availability of data and public opinion and what you can do to crunch numbers with computers has advanced so far that they don't have the data going back that far. Nowhere in those surveys is the answer of a fear by the American people on the international stage of major power warfare. In 2002, after the 9/11 attacks, the clock goes all the way to 7 minutes to midnight because of fears of nuclear terrorism. Having spent a decade farther back, I don't think it was 17 minutes to midnight the whole time, but I kept a couple of these out. And then in 2007, what changes and why I don't include any additional information is that they add climate change to nuclear weapons as a possible catalyst of global holocaust. And that changes the forces that drive the clock so that it's now much closer at 5 minutes to midnight, not just because of fears of nuclear proliferation from Iran and North Korea, but because fears of climate change are increasing. And by 2017, it's all the way down to 2.5 minutes to midnight. That fear of global catastrophe is back in ways that it has not been before. What I mentioned before about this transatlantic trends, which was the German Marshall Fund, has done since 2003, when they interviewed the American people, or at least the public opinion surveys of the American people, the 5 greatest threats were mentioned. Notice none of them are major power warfare. It's terrorism, it's regional conflicts in the Middle East, it's Islamic fundamentalism, and it's proliferation issues, North Korea and Iran, WMD. How much do you think people have sketched out the global annihilation from proliferation? I have no idea. They're worried about it enough to put it on the list, but whether it's a single nuclear attack or catalytic holocaust that causes nuclear winter is beyond what the public opinion survey does. That's the first major difference. What happens in the debate world? Security case. I will tell you right now, I think it is a good development to allow teams to play small ball. What I mean by that is you couldn't claim a disease advantage that saved 60,000 people in the days of the 80s because you had slightest risk of nuclear holocaust and it would be a negative vote. If a team now wants to run that small ball, and I will say as long as it sort of meets the substantially threshold, it's got to be high enough that there is some negative ground. But as long as it meets that substantially threshold, that idea that you can run a small affirmative that doesn't go into major catalytic consequences is something that I think is a useful debate argument. It has allowed different types of real-world policy. I always thought that we allowed the big picture global holocaust because it made the debates more interesting. It made them more higher stakes, more impactful. It just made it a more interesting game. That's not always true depending on what the issues are you want to debate and what your particular area of expertise is. The second thing, without question, that has changed since the 1990s. You may not have liked what Reagan did politically, but you knew that if you wanted to do something, he could get it done. There is no question in my mind that the biggest difference in the last 20 years is that so few people now think the government can do anything competent at any level for any issue going forward. That they are not capable of delivering services that actually help people. The confidence in government decline. It is not unique to this field. It is not unique to the debate game. That is a graphic that was taken by 3 different public opinion surveys going all the way back to 1958. And the data was conducted through a survey over most of September, a little bit more than a month in 2015. What's noteworthy about the data is a couple of peaks and valleys. Around the time, as you get out of the Kennedy years, through the Nixon years, where do you think that trough is in the late 70s? Watergate. But it starts to rise as you get through the Reagan years. Remember, this is public trust in government. And as you get to the end of the Cold War, you get that spike to where it's above 40%. And then you get the end of the Cold War and it plummets down below 20%. The reason for that is related studies that have been done, and people have talked about this elsewhere, is that when the public feels insecure, when they feel that there is economic insecurity or physical insecurity, they turn to the government for help. When they feel like things are fine, they want the government to stay hands-off. So that public faith in government at the end of the Cold War hits the floor because there is this sense that problems in the world are getting safer. That we don't need the massive defense buildup of the Reagan administration anymore. That is causing economic problems. That the government's defense spending is too high. The budget deficit is too high. And you get into debates as you get into the Clinton years in the early 1990s about the size of the American budget deficit. And that trough that hits below 20% just at the time that the Cold War is won. That even though you might think that that would lead to a rise in confidence, in the sense that the government has done something right by winning the Cold War, it hits the floor because people think it's no longer necessary. So the government should stay the heck out of their business. Where's the spike? 9/11. That period of bipartisanship that came in the aftermath of 9/11 when the public felt insecure because they had no idea what Al-Qaeda was, how they managed to fly a plane into a building, or there was a general sense of insecurity that the government had to do something right. That they needed the government, that then fades as you go over time. You get to the global financial crisis at the beginning of 2008, and a general sense, partially because of an exacerbated sense of partisanship that doesn't allow policies to be passed, where this trough of below 20% confidence in government, and frankly other institutions as well, in the press, in government at the national level, at the state level, at the local level, in the education system. The sense that institutions are working for people has been through the floor in the last 10 years in ways that I haven't seen it in my 40 years prior to that, or that people like my father haven't seen since he remembers the pre-Watergate era when people thought the government did everything right, and there was the era of Camelot in the Kennedy administration. Unless you're politics aside, depending on what your view was. That trough when the Cold War was won and that spike of 9/11 is something about how the government is turned to, when people feel that they need the government in times of economic and physical insecurity. The government, of course, has to be able to deliver services and find answers in those times in order to have confidence raised. But if there is a sense that do that, there is both the demand for government services, or the sense of insecurity, and the supply of government services, or the sense of confidence that the government can do something. So what happens in the debate world in that period when the confidence in governments declined? Anti-state case. The state can't do anything right. The state is bad. We shouldn't have to defend state action because they're incompetent. That becomes much more prevalent in the debate world because there's this sense in the public more generally that government can't do anything right. That we shouldn't be forced to defend government action as an affirmative because we don't envision ourselves providing these services, don't envision an affirmative that can actually work, don't envision that the federal government can do something, because the debate game is always based around resolutions that is the U.S. federal government should blank. David Brooks has written about this a lot, about how that has been the structure of American politics between the Republican and the Democratic Party forever, until recently. And now it's breaking. Because nobody thinks that Trump is a real Republican. He doesn't stand by Republican standards. And what each party represents is now much less clear. And that ability of the government to provide services, which Democrats advocated, and the party that asked for the government to back off and stay out of people's lives, which is what the Republicans advocated, small government. That divide in politics is breaking because the parties are redefining themselves and realigning in ways that hasn't happened in modern political history. And it shapes the way the debate game is going because there's not a sense that the government can deliver services, and it's much broader than any one topic or any one year. So what's happening in the debate itself outside of that development of security case and that sense of anti-government or anti-state case that's reflecting the real-world trends? I did a quick, not really quick, I collected data on the number of teams competing at national debate tournaments. I went and looked at any tournament that had at least 100 teams going back to the 2011-2012 debate season and used the 2011-12 season as a base. That data was collected from the NSDA site. Tab room becomes much more prevalent about 3 years later. For all of you who don't know, that's how all these tournaments run. Like you all know, you're linked in it even after the administration's done for the running the tournaments themselves. Once all that stuff is collected, there's the number of tournaments competing in each one of those. Is I've graphed as a percentage compared to the baseline of 2011-2012. I skipped 2012-2013 because the data, for whatever reason, was not made available on the NSDA site, and Tab room didn't exist to have the historical records. But starting in the 2012-13 or 13-14 season is when the data started being collected. There's going to be a bunch of lines that show up quickly, so I'm going to ask you just to take this in for a second, and I'll walk you through what these different things are. The color coding is different regions of the country. There's basically 5 major regional circuits. There's the Northeast, there is the Southeast, it's kind of based around Atlanta, up to Nashville, down to Florida. There is the Texas circuit, which takes around its neighbors as well. And there's the West broadly, which I'm sure is bigger than just California, and there's a lot of subdivisions there. But at least at the national level, you have some of those. The red tournaments are the Texas area. The green tournaments are the Midwest area, based around the Chicago, up to Minnesota, over to Detroit, down broadly to Kentucky for the Ohio Valley tournament. What you notice about these trends is that for the most part, national tournaments, and again, these are mostly at 100 teams or more at some point in the tournament. So I didn't include NBA for that reason because it's less than 100. I think it was all of the other octafinal tournaments and about half of the quarterfinal bids for the TOC over time. Most of them are in the 90 to 110% range. It hasn't really changed that much over the course of the 5 years. There are a fair number of tournaments that drop down maybe to the 80% range. The purple tournaments are the Northeast. The only two that are on there are Bronx and Harvard, because those are the only two tournaments that have quarters or octave bids at some point that are around 100 tournaments or more. So a couple things happened for the two outliers. You'll notice it's actually both Ohio Valley and Blake dropped down to about 67%, or about 2/3. The two green dots in the middle there are 2016-17. I talked to Dave about Ohio Valley. What changed in Ohio Valley has not changed that much in the last 4 years. It was that Capital Debate stopped bringing about 20 or 30 teams to the Ohio Valley tournament about 4 years ago. There was an explosion in the Northeast in Capital Debate that does policy, that has now not done policy debate as much in the last few years, that leads to this hollowing out of Northeastern tournaments, in part. Bronx that goes down, and it has a little spike up in part because St. Mark's was intentionally a smaller tournament this last year, so you notice a dip in St. Mark's that drops down. It's the red dots that drop down just below the Bronx purple solid line just there. So Bronx picks up some of what St. Mark's drops off, I believe, although I haven't tracked that so it's 1 for 1. Harvard goes through the floor in the last couple of years. There's a tendency to think that this is probably weather related. 3 years ago, I think, or 2 years ago, I have never been to a tournament before that canceled the day because it was snowing so hard that they couldn't get people to the tournament. And then 2 years ago, it was so freaking cold that they actually had hypothermia cases. And there's been some competition from a tournament at Pinecrest down in Florida. That can't possibly explain everything that's going on at Harvard because public forum's going up, even in those weather cases, in that tournament. The Northeast is hollowing out. The tournaments that used to debate, in the programs that used to debate when I did, are leaving. Guys like Stefan Bouchard, who works at Lakeland and wrote the Millennial Debate website for years, is now doing public forum almost exclusively, and Lakeland's gone. The core of the Northeast Circuit used to be the New York area, where Edgemont, Bronx, Stuyvesant, Lakeland, and back in my day, Hendrick Hudson debated, and you had other schools like Monticello, where Sandy Stafford works at the time when I was in school, at Newburgh Free Academy, or at Monticello and other satellite programs. You had a much more developed Massachusetts circuit. Now it's only Lexington. The TOC champion in 1987 was from Manchester High School in Massachusetts. Was Tim Averill's kids. Their faces are like, you gotta kid me. Doesn't do policy anymore, it's gone. The Maryland circuit exploded and is now contracted. Appleton's gone. Centennial doesn't really do debate anymore. Darrell's got a heck of a program at McDonough, but the programs in the school around it, other than BCC, don't really exist anymore. The Northeast is hollowed out, and it's all happened in the last 4 years, and it's happened fast. Edgemont, my alma mater, was a round-robin level team up until about 2 years ago. They had about one varsity policy team last year. They had a team at the JV semifinals at Harvard. But most of Brian Emanuel's attention has been drawn to public forum because of a lot of the appeal of public forum to his kids for a variety of reasons. If he can get an assistant coach and hire him, he can fix that, but otherwise he's got to make a choice to where there's this migration going on in the Northeast and it's happening right under our noses, and it's happening now. I took this one step further. I went not just to just major tournaments or the 100-team tournaments, but to look at all of the Northeastern tournaments separately where there is a TOC bid at all. I did not include the Scranton-Mamaroneck tournament because it has changed locations over the past couple of years, and so it's gone through its own sort of turmoil. Notice where the 80% bar is for most of the other national tournaments. The only tournament that's staying above 80% in the Northeast is Pennsbury. It is the only tournament in the Northeast that is retaining numbers that it used to have before for reasons that I can't quite explain. But it's probably also why Pennsbury's bid, or at least contributed to the appeal of Pennsbury getting a semis bid rather than a finals bid this year, in part, I would guess. Bronx has gone up a little bit, as I said, in that last year, principally because St. Mark's shrinks intentionally from an 80 to a 60-team tournament, and Bronx picks up some of those teams. Lexington is holding reasonably strong at about 2/3 the size of what it used to, which is still a very strong tournament that's a quarters bid, but it's not at that 80% threshold that a lot of those national tournaments are. The rest of the Northeast tournaments, for a variety of reasons, some of which are tournament specific, some of which are general, are through the floor. Georgetown disconnects from the non-policy divisions that are held at Georgetown proper, and that stopped a couple of years ago. It has plummeted to almost to below 40% of where it used to be. And Harvard, we talked about before, I am sure some of that is weather related, but it can't entirely be weather related because that's not happening in the other divisions of debate going forward. It's happening in policy only. When people talk about the concern for policy debate going forward, and I talked at the beginning of this, talking about all the advantages it has given to me, all of the things that you can get as a professional career in addition to the educational lab that this activity provides. The most damning evidence may be a qualitative piece of evidence or something that I had in an interview from a friend of mine who was one of the debaters cited in that group of 21 that he told me before. I occasionally have conversations about whether we want to encourage our children to participate in policy debate. That migration of people that from my debate era of the 1990s, 1980s, are coming back to the activity in droves and literally finding themselves struck from entire tournaments because we will vote on a framework, or because we do policy debate, or because we don't know the critical literature, or whatever the case is. T.A. McKinney couldn't get in a varsity round because he was struck from almost the entire tournament when he was at Pennsburg. I've had the same experience in a lot of tournaments I've been to where you end up judging a lot of other rounds because of that striking, that unfamiliarity with the old school judges. The important part of this is not what our experience is with the striking, but it's the argument that he made from his experience debating in the 2000s. That incentive to do research of people who prefer plan-focused debate and those who think folks should debate on identity politics in the clash between the two. I believe there is a way to bridge that gap. But if that clash continues, it is undercutting the activity from the inside out, starting in the Northeast, and it is hollowing out. It is vanishing. Even if you could get that innovative policy argument, that incentive to research, that drive, that research that led person after person after person on that laundry list that I bored you to tears with, of people who took that professional expertise of research and policy analysis judgment into a professional field with them, will go, unless that continues to change. Even if that policy argument, that incentive to do policy research is vanished, the question is whether it's worth the emotional cost, and at least in this one person's judgment, not having kids who are close to the activity, he thinks at this stage he would not encourage his kids to come back. That pipeline of people who do policy debate because they know the benefit of the activity is in danger of drying up if the tension that exists in this activity and the migration of some of the changes doesn't mend itself in ways that we can meld the new innovative arguments with the old style and still get those research benefits, still get plan-based debates that are about the topic, that are focused on problem solving, on making the world a better place. At the end of the day, what I wanted out of this was for you all, was what this is not. I want to be clear about what this is not. This speech is not two things. First, it is not a scientific survey. The 21 people that I gave you examples of are personal anecdotes of people whom I met through debate, through an internship that was established, or through professional experience. It is only in the foreign policy field. It is not a who's who of the best debaters of all time. You'd have to go into law. You'd have to go into many other areas. I mentioned Glenn Greenwald at the top just to get your attention, but he wasn't included in the list of the 21 people, in foreign policy analysis going forward. This is not a scientific survey. I did not go back through and research the past debaters. I gave you my experience of who I have met from one person's experience in the activity and then in a profession 20 years subsequently. It is not comprehensive. It is a sliver or the tip of the iceberg for the people that get professional benefit out of the policy debate game. That problem-solving, research-oriented, plan-based debates on the resolutions. That game. Second thing this is not. This is not an indictment of critiques. It is not an indictment of race debate. Those things have to be integrated into this game in ways that preserves the old skills and melds them with new skills. For the reason that I mentioned about the trend in the belief that security fears don't run the world the way that it used to in the 80s. For the reasons to allow for the activity to have small ball debates, speaking for the baseball guy, to talk about preventing diseases as long as you can prove it's in the topic, and there's negative ground in my opinion. As long as you have that, deploying the security K as a weapon helps you in those cases. It helps you on the affirmative to fight off nuclear war disads. It helps you on the negative if you want to run a small advantage and say the affirmative disads are outlandish. There has to be a space for both. But if one supplants the other, that entire list of people that I mentioned who have professional experience from this activity will go away if there isn't that research incentive, and the incentive that will dry up in ways that that person who had debated before talked about in their case. Here's what this is. This is fundamentally two things. First, it's to raise awareness that the feedback loop of debate is consistently, massively, and systematically de-emphasizing the policy debate value of people who do this activity. It is oriented only for the people who stay in the activity, and the people who have gotten those professional benefits and left don't have reason to come back unless you get the odd duck like me that comes back because I wanted to get back into the coaching game and I didn't have a career that prevented me from doing so. But without that feedback loop to prove that there are benefits to the game, that people who make the argument that these debates don't matter because nobody adopts your affirmative at the end of the game are fundamentally giving credence to the worst, most rampant stereotype of this generation, that you are all about instant gratification, that you are all about click and receive, and if you don't get the benefits of the policy that you advocated in that debate, as soon as the debate is done, that there is no value to the activity. I can tell you based on 20 years of experience and 21 other examples, that is flat wrong. That is flat wrong. There is a value in this activity that transcends the activity because you do those practice debates, because you do those debates at tournaments, because each one of those debates is a thread in a tapestry or a fiber in a trampoline that allows you to use the system in ways that you want to use it, to understand when using the system has its limits, to understand how to leverage the system in order to pursue the goal that you think is most important, and to know when you have to go around the system and figure out some other form, whether it's a social movement or something else, to change the system from the outside rather than from the inside. But knowing when you can use the system and when you can't only happens because you have dozens or hundreds of debates that test them in different formats across a range of topics. And they have to be on race. They have to integrate race into this activity. And it is happening. When Stéphane Bouchard wrote the surveillance topic 2 years ago, he said the principal policy dilemma in that surveillance topic was privacy versus security. But he knew that across the board, there were going to be racial profiling debates. And that this activity needed it in ways that you might not be able to include as have a policy to reduce racism. Because there's no negative ground for that, for one thing. And for another thing, it's going to be hard in some areas of the country that have to go for it. It is not an accident that education is the policy now, is the topic you are debating, because race is an issue in education policy. It is not an accident that income inequality was the runner-up, and I think probably didn't win because the solvency mechanisms were too complicated. It wasn't about a lack of interest in income inequality. It's because when you start talking about tax incentives and other solvency mechanisms, it complicates it and makes some people that know that 14-year-olds are going to have to debate this topic scared off by it. That's my guess. No data to back that whatsoever. It's not an accident that over and over again, on the short list of topics, I'm a reviewer for the papers that go into the topic process. Over and over, criminal justice system reform is one of the papers that is coming. And it is coming on one of the topics because it allows to address race. It has to be done in a policy way. And there has to be a way for the activity to open up to deal with it. One of the things that will be interesting on this topic is dealing with the 10th Amendment debates. Because the reason why the activity has shied away from a lot of social policy debates is because of the 10th Amendment. Because it's not a federal government purview for a lot of cases. And so what the affirmative ground is on these cases of social policy may be limited because social policy is constitutionally reserved for the states. So we might need to get more creative about resolutions. We might need to get creative about actors. We might need to look at politics and figure out how to change them in ways that happened before. And it's something that I want to do as an educator going forward to figure out how to best have the activity reflect the changes in politics if the Republican and Democratic parties no longer define that political debate between whether government should provide services or stay out of services that it has done for our political lifetimes. Here's the second thing this was. This whole presentation is effectively a love story about this game. It is why I went to college where I went to college. It is why I got the internship where I got my internship. It is why I got the job that I got. It is why I have an interest in foreign policy. It is why I went to the PhD program that I did. It is why I came back to teach. This game is my identity. It is the reason that I did everything I did, not because of how I was born, but because of how I developed, because of how I came across professionally. Because when I think of myself as a policy debater first and foremost. Because it has affected the world in every professional way you can imagine. And it is dying in my ear. We have to heal this. We have to heal this. What people in debate today don't understand is the ability to use this game to think about what is possible with the government. The number of teams that said, I can't run that because Trump would, that affirmative after the middle of the year because Trump would overturn it, don't understand the purpose of the game. It is to imagine a world in which you can make better policy. It is to imagine a world in which you have the reins of power, in which you can decide whether you want to go into government, in which you can decide whether the issue that you want to push on can be done inside government, outside government, on the margins of government, by protesting against the government, or any other way in that area. It allows you and empowers you to pursue your passion and make the most progress on it, to structure society in a way that makes the most progress possible. That's what this game does. It empowers. In whatever issue gets plugged in, the issue is the software, the game is the hardware. But if the game breaks down, if we see a schism in this activity where there's two separate circuits going in two separate directions that don't go to the same tournaments anymore, like we see at the Bronx versus the St. Mark's weekend, like we're starting to see at the Harvard versus the Pinecrest weekend, unless that is healed, you're not going to give the policy benefits to a huge swath of people that want to figure out how to empower or when to go around the system to pursue that policy. To end this story, what I want you to all think of is quite simply this. The people that I have met in this activity are the ones that have become my professional colleagues. They are the most talented people in the country, and they will shape its future. The policy context when I was debating existed with a Soviet Union and a massive number of changes in the 25 years in between. How do you think the world's going to change in the next 20 to 25 years for you? It doesn't matter what the government can do today. It doesn't matter what it can do tomorrow. It matters what it can do 10 years from now, 20 years from now. It matters what you can do in those positions. Because at the end of the day, the smartest people for this country's future, I guarantee you right now, are in this room. And they are in the tournaments that you will face against each other. And there is no educational laboratory. You can take no class. You can pursue no other extracurricular activity. You will not get it from Quiz Bowl. You will not get it from athletes. You will not get it anywhere else. That allows you to start early to figure out, how do I solve these problems? What is the best alternative to make progress, and how do we structure society to combat society's challenges on foreign and domestic policy? If this game breaks down, it is not only a detriment to your future, it is not only the end of the game, it is a detriment to this country's future. We all know the government can serve better, needs to serve better, has to serve better in ways than it does now. It will change when people feel the economic insecurity and the physical insecurity that comes in waves over the generations, that comes in and out. The only way to make government more capable is to make this generation trained to be able to provide those services and know when they can't go through government to get those services, to go around government for those services. The only way going forward for the country to be at its best is this game to be at its best. Because this is the best game I've ever encountered, and the smartest people are in this room. Thank you. Let me provide one other thing. None of the people that I was able to mention were black. Darrell Birch debated at the same time that I did. He's a colleague. One of the best experiences I had in coming back to the activities when I came back at Wake Forest, I knew about the developments that Darrell had done in performance debate. I knew about the way that he had developed debate in Maryland. I've had the opportunity to talk to him a couple times about the way he wants to use the policy debate game to provide opportunities for social movements to make life better for people of color, for black community. There is no way to get around this problem, and the national security community is aware of it, because it's not unique to the debate community. The fact is that blacks are underrepresented. But that's changing. The role models are changing. It's not just that Barack Obama was elected president. It's that Colin Powell was the National Security Advisor, the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, Secretary of State. Condoleezza Rice was Secretary of State. Susan Rice was National Security Advisor and Ambassador to the UN. Reuben Brigady is the Dean of the school that I work at, the LA School of International Affairs. He's black. He wrote an article in Foreign Affairs called Diversity in U.S. National Security that talked about an issue, a memorandum that Obama issued at the end of his term, or toward the end of his term in October, about promoting diversity and inclusion in the national security workforce. It was followed up, among other places, at a symposium at CSIS on October 5th that's listed on there, about working with the hiring practices in government and hiring institutions in government to enrich the policy ecosystem and broaden the talent base. And finally, some of you may have heard about the, probably not, they're on summer, but there were a couple of fellowships, the Wrangell Fellowship and the Pickering Fellowship, that came into the news lately because the administration initially canceled the incoming class, which is part of an effort to downsize the government across the board because they're not hiring anybody. And subsequently, media pressure overturned that to allow those classes back in. And in both cases, in one case, the program is exclusively focused on providing young people being administered by Howard, and in the other cases, encourages people of color to provide through it. There is a widespread awareness that while the activity did not produce opportunities like the ones I listed before for people of color, that is not the case going forward. It is something that is open, it is something where there are role models, it is something where the doors are opening for them. So if people make the argument that the people who served in the administration only got to go in there because they were white, they are right about the past, they are probably wrong about the future, because those doors are open. The question is, will people of color have the experience and the practice in policy phase to be able to take advantage of those opportunities, to move into government, or to know when you have to move outside of government if the opportunities and the system does not allow you to make progress on the issues that you want to make progress on. That's changing. Now I'm done.